Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade. Today I am here with Leland. Leland, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Cade. It's an honor to be here.
It is nice for me to be back on the most familiar side of the microphone. You are so gracious to have me as a guest on your podcast, Wild Dogs, where we got to chat all about Cube from a high level perspective. But I'm not used to talking that much in a row, so I'm excited to flip back to the other side.
It was so much fun having you on the show. And yeah, we just did a big overview of Cube in general, kind of targeted at players who are maybe interested in Cube, haven't played Cube before, as well as, a general overview of Cube as a whole. And it was great having you there to kind of encapsulate what Cube is as best as we could, I guess you could say.
Right, this massive topic that I've devoted a whole project like this to trying to capture little snippets of. We'll try to wedge that all into a to a nice concise conversation.
Right.
But Leland, you host this program called Wild Dogs, kind of a
Mhm.
conversational magic flavored podcast where you and your friend Luke go
Mhm.
with some degree of regularity, spending the time together, just exploring kind of whatever strikes your fancy at the moment. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so we're currently a once monthly show about magic in general, and we cover a broad range of topics from set reviews. We've covered constructed formats 101. We try to cover Wizards news, current events in the magic space. So, yeah, it's kind of like a broad, more conversational tone show about magic as a whole and the things that we love about it.
That's so good. And as noted, you were very gracious to let me sneak on and hang with you for a little
Mhm.
bit. So a really special thing for me. And how fun that we get to connect then through Cube as well. That was one of the earlier
Mhm.
things we mentioned. I remember in our early chats, you were talking about this little bar cube you were working on. And now
Mhm.
today we get to look at it in its fully evolved form, in its fully
Exactly.
fledged version. So we're going to get to dive into the An-Havva Inn. Before we get there, I'd like to ask as we get started, Leland, why Cube? And how does that intersect with your magic journey?
Yeah, so I was first introduced to Cube a few years ago via a friend's powered vintage cube. I always loved playing limited and also building constructed decks, specifically that were in singleton. So commander to Canlander to now more recently dual commander as well.
Sweet.
So to me, it felt like a very organic kind of outlet and natural progression to combine my love of singleton, building in singleton, and my just general enjoyment of draft environments.
Speaking of a love for Singleton, was that something that like you had tried other formats and you just found that that's where it resonated for you?
So I first started playing Magic right around the pandemic, actually. It was like in 2019, 2020. And when I first started playing, I was naturally drawn to Commander because like I was brand new to the game. I really wanted to explore everything all at once, like learn all the different cards, all the different spells. And so to me, playing with play sets didn't really compute. I was like, I want to build decks where I can play a bunch of different spells. So naturally, I was drawn to Commander. And then from there, yeah, got into Standard. I play Legacy, Pre Modern. So I'm cool with, the play sets of Life from the Loam or play sets of Wasteland. I can be that way, but I just love the variety that Singleton offers from game to game, which is why I guess dual commander really interests me still, being able to play 1v1 versus a multiplayer game.
Yeah, and I imagine like the 1v1 clears up some of the challenges that Commander provides. It's no longer
Mhm.
like what power level are we at? It's like we're trying to win. So it plays
Exactly.
differently.
My favorite deck that I own is Crook's dual commander deck, and
Yes.
it just allows you to play even cards as simple as like Unearth
Oh, one of my favorites.
or Duress. Duress, something that is often considered unplayable in Commander multiplayer formats, but is one of my more beloved cards for any 1v1 constructed format.
Turns out non-creature spells are good, and if you can answer them one for one in that format,
Hmm.
that's pretty decent. Do you still have
Yeah.
the fancy Croxa that you got for your special episode y'all did?
Yeah, so he's always on my desk.
Oh, that's so good.
My signed artist proof. Actually, this was for my 30th birthday. I went to MagicCon Chicago, and I got to meet Vincent Proce. And yeah, Croaks has long been my favorite Magic card of all time. So this is like a true grail piece that will always just be on my desk with me.
That's really special. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like with this timeline, you went really deep really quickly in a number of ways.
Mm-hmm.
To think that in,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose, at time of recording, within 5 years to have gone through this exploration of formats like Commander, dipping all the way down to pre-modern or legacies, like some of
Mm-hmm.
your higher end constructed formats, and then now Cube's part of that mix.
Yeah, I really went kind of all in with this game, and maybe that's kind of the nature of the timing of it being the pandemic and a lot of free time on my hands. But yeah, Magic very quickly became my favorite game of all time. And when it comes to my hobbies, I tend to go in all in. Having this play group that I currently still play with and meeting the people that I've met through this game just kind of naturally led me to Cube. So here we are.
Well, that's really good. Well, I'd love to explore this project that you've been working on here. I'd love for you to give us an elevator pitch, kind of the overview of the An-Havva Inn.
Sure. So the An-Havva Inn is what I would describe to be a medium power level cube that focuses on graveyard matter synergies and follows bar cube design tendencies, meaning no token generation, no +1/+1 counters. The conception of this cube started with the thought of utilizing other zones, primarily the graveyard, to make up for some of the complexity lost in Barcube's proclivity for reducing the amount of extraneous game pieces. So it was kind of just like a design challenge initially. I wanted to kind of challenge what we generally associate with Barcube. And I've always wanted to build a Graveyard Matters cube. It's one of my favorite ways of playing Magic. So it all just kind of came together and it kind of took off from there.
That's really exciting. So, did you go into it with the bar cube sensibility, or is that something that you determined along the way?
Initially, it wasn't there. I forget exactly when it came about, but it was early on into developing like a Graveyard Matters 180 card cube. So like Tubert specifically, the design principles laid out in Tubert's really fascinated me. So I wanted to kind of start there, and then I started to do a bit of research on Barcube and thought that'd be really interesting for my play group in terms of kind of the other cubes we play with. It just seemed a little bit different, a little bit more casual, a little bit more different from what we usually play. So that's what kind of drew me in was Barcube mixed with this kind of graveyard focus. So those two kind of combined together to form the An-Havva Inn design goals.
I really appreciate that you started with something smaller than a 360, which is where it is currently.
Correct.
But jumping in the place of 180 usually is for a Tubert perhaps, or for up to 4 players. I imagine that was the original intent, right?
Yeah, so it started off as 180 card cube for the pods of 4 players that I often play with. But then, yeah, as the project evolved, I maintained a lot of those initial design sensibilities that are seen in Barcube. So no tokens or counters, those are still very present and where the An-Havva is at right now. But it's kind of evolved beyond the more casual vibes typically associated with Barcube. I actually very recently built a draftable peasant battle box, which sounds weird.
No, that sounds great.
To function as more of my quote unquote barcube, if that makes sense. So essentially, long story short, the An-Havva Inn started as more of like a casual oriented environment for, like you said, 2 to 4 players, and then kind of gradually evolved into a more serious passion project at 360 cards, which I just naturally pushed the power level maybe a bit higher than is, I guess, typically seen in bar cubes generally.
Yeah. So often when we think about bar cubes,
Mm-hmm.
they're often referred to in these senses of like lower power level or something like a gimmick, maybe. But the way you've approached the project, at least in its current iteration, kind of turns that on its head a little bit, right? Like it aims for a higher powered experience, like something that you may not, if you're using all real cards, that you may not take to a picnic or to a school table or something.
Right. I like anecdotally, it's bar cube that you double sleeve. Um, so yeah, basically, once I finally decided that I wanted to go in this bar cube direction, I started looking at a lot of the popular bar cube lists that are on Cube Cobra, and I liked a lot of what I saw actually, and would actually really enjoy drafting and playing a lot of these bar cubes that I was looking at. But I realized I wanted to take the An-Havva Inn in a different direction than like you were expressing sleeveless, errata heavy, and hyper cheap cubes. And yeah, like I said, I have that vibe in my battle box. So I just wanted to explore something a little bit more than what current bar cube trends portray.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I've talked to some other folks in the past about the challenge of the terminology bar cube, right? It kind of carries this weight of, I don't know, this expectation like, oh, you must play it in a bar. And it's like, not everybody's going to play it in that way
Mm-hmm.
or exactly that way. It's just kind of a term to try to capture a lot of ideas at once about accessibility and the practicality of a cube.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like this really is leaning really far into that sensibility in a way that many others don't.
Yeah, and I guess one way pushing into like a newer direction or like a different direction from other bar cubes was just in leveling up the power level by mostly opening up doors to its design by upping the budget compared to a lot of other bar cubes, and then really focusing in back in on this graveyard matters theme. So once I kind of had those parameters set, I was able to go in and slowly improve upon the card quality to a level that felt both powerful yet fun for a casual pod. So it still retained some of that casualness, but I still wanted to play with cards that were in, powered vintage cubes. For example, one of my favorite parts of playing white decks is in their efficiency of removal. So your swords to plowshares, your leyline bindings, your path to exiles. But I also kind of paired those with some classic lower power options like Banishing Light and Glass Casket that are still able to perform well in the environment. Tameshi, Reality Architect, is present in kind of like the Azorius decks naturally. And because of his ability, you can utilize artifact and enchantment removal a bit better in certain decks compared to a Swords to Plowshares or a Leyline. Or I guess not Leyline Binding. That also goes into the Tameshi package generally. But like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile can be like you can bring some of these quote unquote lower power level removal spells and bring them up a little bit with these graveyard synergies.
Yeah, they interact differently, certainly too. Like
Yeah.
you said, that they have there's a context in which they fit differently.
Mm-hmm.
When you were increasing count from your 4-player version up to 8-player version, did you ever consider breaking Singleton for that? I know you mentioned your passion for Singleton along the way.
Yeah, that passion for Singleton reigns true almost nearly 100% of the time. So, yeah, to be honest, not really. I definitely recognize it as a possibility, though I'd really need to find inspiration from a card to push it away because I'm, like I said, it's a personally constraint that I'm like very rigid with. So I haven't really found a spell that I've considered. However, when I was formulating the fixing lands for 360, I did for a very short period of time consider 2 copies of each survey land and 2 copies of each fetch land as just a very clean, simple way that synergizes with graveyard very heavily with both fetches and surveilling into the bin. But I ultimately could not. I just couldn't break Singleton, and the shock lands and fast lands are still in there. I love the play pattern of fast lands, so I just, even though they don't have the basic land types, I had to keep them in. And then shock lands, it's like I'm just gonna keep it in Singleton, especially at 360. Like, I guess when you get to like 540 and above, maybe you mess around with having double shocks or double fetches rather. But even then, there's so many great fixing lands that even if this ends up being 540 plus, I'll still probably be in Singleton for my for my land base. But yeah, that's just my personal preference for sure.
Well, shout out to Baltimore Singleton, of course, the the setup of usually double shock and double
Mhm.
fetch if you're into that.
I love it. I honestly, yeah, give me all the fetch lands for sure. But I couldn't do it yet.
And isn't it funny how almost immediately perennial the surveil lands have become? They're
They're
like
so good.
so ideal for so many formats, and especially something like this where you're very graveyard focused.
Yeah, I run at least one survey land in every deck I build. Period. From legacy to EDH to whatever they're legal in, I'm having at least one.
Let's camp on archetypes for just a second because you
Okay.
have done a lot of really neat work updating your overview page. I know we talked about perhaps some in
Yeah.
preparation for this, but also your passion for the project comes through clearly, like the amount of detail you've put into engaging with how different color pairs engage, or I should say
Mhm.
color groups, because it's not just like a clean, these two colors operate together.
Right.
Can you speak some to how you think about archetypes and engagement in the cube that way?
Yeah, that's absolutely something I spent a ton of time considering, and is part of the reason why the cube remains very gold card heavy and multicolored focused. While there are plenty of monocolored cards that certainly speak to obvious archetypes, like your Goblin Welders, your Animate Deads, I found that having cards like Priest of Fellrights, or Grim Flayer, or Bloodbraid Challenger, they function as a way to indicate to drafters what other decks are out there in 2+ colors, because I found that in Vintage Cube, in like a powered Vintage Cube, like the MTGO Cube, the Graveyard Matters decks are like, yes, there are Welder decks present. There are, obviously, Reanimation is the big one that comes to mind. And so having a full 5-color cube dedicated to all things Graveyard, I just feel that it can be hard for some people to conceptualize, oh, what does an Azorius deck look like in this Graveyard Matters cube? Or what does a Gruul deck look like? So there's a lot of discourse regarding gold cards getting passed and end up not getting drafted. And I definitely find that to be true in some cases. But I think here in this environment, the nice thing about having all these colors interact with the graveyard in some capacity is that there are many times where a deck can start in one lane while you're drafting and then it gets stretched into like another pocket of Graveyard Matters naturally, but you can still pull from your like initial pool of cards. So one example that I have written here is, let's say you do draft that Priest of Fellrights early and you try to set your way into Reanimator, and then you get past a Chainer Nightmare Adept, which plays great into your Reanimation package. It throws stuff in the bin, but then it also grants you a key piece of graveyard card advantage. And also now you're splashing red, so you're looking at some of the Rakdos stuff. So I think having all that fixing there and all these gold cards there, they push people to think about the graveyard in ways that you might not otherwise think of the graveyard in Cube. So again, it's a huge reason why I emphasize fixing, because there's some pretty interesting crossover between all these different color pairings. So 3+ color decks are what I believe to be the kind of the sweet spot for the An-Havva Inn.
Well, first, you don't ever have to convince me on Chain or Nightmare Adept. That card's sweet.
It's so cool.
But as you described it there, do you think about these themes kind of like lanes that you expect drafters to fall into, or does it become more broad, like in ways that people are going to put them together?
So it can totally be both. Again, the nice thing about a great percentage of these cards caring about the graveyard is that you can, if you really want to sit in the Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer lane and you want to be red heavy, you can totally do that. But then let's say all of a sudden you see, oh, there's an Emery in this pack. Oh, now I'm blue red. That works really good. And then all of a sudden you get past a Moira and Tashar, which is a very random Orzhov legendary that cares about historic spells. So your artifacts. So now all of a sudden you're in this weird 4-color artifact deck that probably like no one's ever even thought like feasible, but you're trying to play around with multiple strategies. So you can totally do the mono red welder lane, or you can evolve that throughout the draft into like a 4-color weird artifact pile, you know?
Well, and it sounds like you support this with the mana base as well, right? Like you've
Yeah.
included a higher than average amount of fixing here.
So it currently has 52 lands, fixing lands, I should say. Like I said, we've got the fast land package, shock land, fetch land, survey land, and then the full set of triomes. So because we have 48 gold cards, we absolutely need 50 plus fixing lands to kind of support that. And again, it's a young cube in its cycle, but through both test drafting on Cube Cobra and we've already got a couple in-person drafts in with this cube. Yeah, the fixing lands are plentiful and allow for functional 3+ color decks.
Oh, that's excellent. That was what I was going to ask next. Is as you know, as players have gotten to experience that, if they're following that flow, if it's like there's more fixing, so we'll take more gold
Mm-hmm.
cards, or if you
Mm-hmm.
see players being more conservative to stick with some of the monocolor options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing that I've found is fixing lands they're not always a gimme pick, but when you're past a triumph, like it's always going to be a good pick, generally speaking. Same thing goes for shock lands, especially fetch lands. Fetch lands open the door to 5-color mana bases very easily. So I don't know. I initially was tentative to go heavy with fixing lands because that can feel Like building a mana base can feel like a bit much at times, but having a really healthy amount of fixing allows for these weird 4-color decks to actually be able to do the weird thing that they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I know that's kind of the boogeyman for designers in some ways of
Mhm.
like, are people just going to take the most powerful cards and jam them together without any regard for theming?
Right.
Like, have you found that you've been able to avoid, the 5-color soup that folks are afraid of, or is that even a fear?
It currently really isn't a fear too much right now because of the amount of weird one-off cards like Moira and Tashar. Again, it goes back to this power level question, and I really try to keep it in that medium range. There are power outliers. So yeah, real quick, I just want to note a couple power outliers that are here, such as Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Actual Factual Reanimate.
But yeah, that seems pretty good here.
Yeah, so the way that I've balanced that out is by one example is the Reanimator package. You still have your Entomb, you still have your Reanimate, and you still have an Archon of Cruelty. That is like a Power Vintage Cube level play pattern there. That's balanced out by not having Dark Ritual. It's balanced out by not having your even Lotus Petal. It's balanced out by not having Atraxa, Gristlebrand, Troll of Khazad-dûm, and instead your reanimation targets are going to be along the lines of like Ashen Rider, Angel of Ruins, those types of reanimation
Classics.
targets. So
Yeah.
classics that aren't quite at your Atraxa tier, aren't at that Troll of Khazad-dûm tier, but I still want to have some of those big splashy plays, but you're not going to 5-color your reanimator deck more than likely, or you're not going to try to 5-color. I mean, you could 5-color artifact, but it's not going to be as oppressive as 5-color good pile decks can sometimes be.
Kind of within that, how do you gauge power level broadly? I know thinking about that mid power, and sometimes with spells, it's easy to say like,
Mm-hmm.
I want a Swords to Plowshares to feel correct here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah, how do you aim for that mid level?
So yeah, I used both the example of, like you said, Swords to Plowshares being high power, and then going back to that reanimator archetype, getting rid of the dark ritual, getting rid of your demonic tutor, still having the entomb, still having these big splashy plays. So it is definitely a challenge trying to strike that balance for quote unquote medium power level. Like, what does that really mean? But a lot of that is found in really considering the archetypes that are present in Graveyard Matters. So, I mean, Reanimator being the biggest one, but for Welder package, for example, obviously you need the Goblin Welder there. It's just so
Right.
it's
Right.
so core, and it's like if we're doing a graveyard cube, we got to do Welder to some capacity, but we're not going to have Triplicate Titan. We're not going to have your Portal to Phyrexia, but it still feels good because you're getting your combustible Gear Hulks back. You're getting your noxious Gear Hulks back. So having these what feel like really strong plays, but they aren't like the strongest play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like and I know you gave some specific examples there, but it sounds like you're engaging with some of the speed and consistency of what you would expect in
Mm-hmm.
maybe a more traditional vintage environment than maybe one that includes tokens or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that you're dialing some of those elements back while not taking the teeth out of the things that are there.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things you said in your overview that stuck out to me was that you want the An-Havva Inn to feel like a balance between accessibility and depth,
Mm-hmm.
which and I know this is always a dangerous way to ask this question because I know this is something that a lot of designers aspire to. We
Right.
want our environments to capture a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about pursuing that goal with your design?
Yeah, it's a great question because, like you said, it is something that everyone strives for. Is having an accessible cube that feels unique without being overly complex, or however you want to word it. So yeah, it was absolutely fundamental when I first started building this cube, and continues to be an essential part of card evaluation moving forward. And so yeah, I really wanted to strike that balance of fun and fair limited play that I love, while also allowing players to experience classically powerful and big splashy plays. So yeah, like I mentioned, those notable outliers of like Uro, Reanimates. I've got Tarmogoyf, I've got Factor Fiction, and one could argue that these cards are way juiced up by this being a format that wants to fill the graveyard, right? But still, I think that that's kind of the point a little bit with this cube, is that players should be able to experience games that are fun and exciting, and part of that excitement is big splashy plays from these power outliers, especially in this unique environment that cares about a graveyard. So I want to feature the cards that show off why this theme is exciting, and that is through stuff like Tarmogoyf. It is through being able to cast Reanimate and have a bunch of targets that show off why Reanimate is so powerful. So yeah, essentially it's an ongoing balancing act of keeping these power outliers to like a relative minimum while also having enough answers for those cards when they do pop up. And again, I keep going back to the example of the Reanimator package, but it's just in having Angel of the Ruins instead of Atraxa. It's in those types of decisions that I try to strike that balance of accessibility and depth of the play patterns.
Well, Leland, I love what you said there about celebrating why this theme is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
It echoes an idea that one of my friends, Greg, would talk about from time to time in other cubes as well. But to say, if this is an environment where insert card here can be the most exciting,
Mm-hmm.
well, then you should do that. Like especially if it's a card that's not celebrated the same way somewhere else.
Right.
So that struck a chord for me, and I love that sensibility. You mentioned early on thinking about trying to engage with different zones.
Mm-hmm.
How did you land on Graveyard, or why Graveyard over playing with things like Exile or something like that?
Yeah, there still is potential for me to play around with different zones like the command zone or exile zone. But Graveyard, like I expressed, has always been a part of Magic that I love. My first like real decks was Rakdos Reanimator in Legacy, and that really solidified my love for anything Graveyard Matters. It also, as I expressed, I really wanted to challenge myself with Barcube. I just like the idea of trying to build aggro without tokens or green without being supplemented by a Luminarch Aspirant or a Bristly Bill or those types of things. So it was like part the challenge, but also why not Graveyard? You know, it's one of my favorite things. It's something I always wanted to do, and then that just kind of naturally coincided with this fascination of Barcube sensibilities.
With those Barkeep sensibilities, have those felt limiting to you in any way? I mean, I know, of course,
Mhm.
the constraints being valuable, but like, has that kept you from some things you would like to try to include?
Yeah, a lot more than I was expecting.
I wish listeners could see your expression. That was
Yeah.
really a pained expression.
Yeah, well, yeah, my one of my favorite cards of all time is Seasoned Pyromancer, and it
Mm,
I cannot. It's that's a no go.
that
Uh,
sure says two tokens on it.
Psychic Frog is a no go. Ledger Shredder is a no go. So there's a ton of really great cards that care about putting stuff in your graveyard or stuff that's in your graveyard that I just can't use if I'm going to stay true to these Barkeep sensibilities. There are a couple exceptions that deal with like finality counters. So we've got Coalstoke Gear Hulk and then Angel of Indemnity, which are like pseudo reanimation effects that give finality counters. So that's like the one exception. It's like a very easily, it's not like you need a million finality counters in any given game of Magic. So
Yeah, you're not proliferating finality counters or
yeah,
anything.
right. Yeah. So yeah, there are definitely some cards that I'm missing for sure. But it's been fun trying to build something fun that doesn't really need tokens or pulse and pulse counters.
I want to draw attention to, and I appreciate the sensibility that even though there are many things about which you have expressed being rigid, that you want to be true to
Mm-hmm.
your rules and true to the things
Yep.
you set up, you can also look at something like the Coalstoke Gear Hulk or the Angel of Indemnity. I guess we don't say
Mm-hmm.
indemnity very often, but you can look at those and say, these meet my broader goals. And in so doing, I can overlook some of these small flaws that would otherwise, like by letter of the law, keep them out.
Yeah, and another card that I'm looking at right now is Balustrade Worm from
Yeah.
Duskmourn.
Oh, yeah.
Just such a like it's just like a green card to its core, and I was like, this has to be if I'm doing a Graveyard Matter Cube with green period in it, like this has to go in it. It reanimates itself in green, in mono green. So yeah, there are just some certain instances where I am a little bit more flexible, but I try to be as rigid as possible with those design goals in mind.
Thinking of limitations as well, one of the things I was noting that you have pursued is an aesthetic limitation, or really aiming for the M15 frame,
Mm-hmm.
and reminder text where possible, which I'm all in favor of, and I know many designers are trying to make
Mm-hmm.
sure if somebody's new to the new to the space, they can
Right.
follow along. Have you felt limited by the M15 frame in a similar vein?
Surprisingly, not as much as you might expect. But yeah, again, continuing that train of thought of accessibility and depth, it was very early on in the An-Havva's development where I made that decision of aesthetic constraints for the purpose of accessibility. Actually, when I was putting it together in Tubert form, I ordered a ton of crazy printings. So the Double Masters, Richard Caden Ferguson, Grim Flare. So an
Oh,
RKF, where it's
yeah.
really trippy. I got a Manifoil Borderless Sphinx of Forgotten Lore. And I had the F&M Retro Foil Giant Growth. And I was like, these look so cool. So excited these are going in my cube. But then the second I actually had them in my hands and like fanned them out, I was like, any new player is going to look at this and have a panic attack. Like, I was like, it's cool to have it super blinged out, but for new players, it's going to overwhelm them. And I often play with casual Magic players, so I really wanted them to be able to pick up, a pack and be able to recognize what they're looking at and being able to read exactly what the card does. So, yeah, like you expressed, I made the decision of going full black border M15 frame with reminder text preferred when available. And foils are okay if all other conditions are met, basically.
Yeah, it's like, if all these are true,
Yeah,
we can look at a
yeah,
foil.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, it sounds like with your engagement with some other formats, like if you're looking at Dual Commander, that's a perfect place to get your RKF borderless stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, even like one card I like to point to is Master of Death, which was printed in Modern Horizons 2, so I could go foil there, but it didn't have the Surveil reminder text until a commander printing in Karlov
Interesting.
Manor. So the MKC printing has the reminder text of what Surveil does. So it's the non-foil because it's got the reminder text.
It's totally reasonable. I imagine we're getting closer to Surveil feeling like an evergreen keyword, but
Yeah, I think when they reprinted Consider with Surveil instead of all the text now, that to me was like the moment of like, oh, Surveil's in.
it's close enough now anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, the hunt for reminder text is a perennial challenge, especially for anything
Mhm.
older. But it sounds like with that modern frame, you have a higher chance of finding the things with that text on it.
Right. And generally speaking, anything M15 frame is going to have the best possible Oracle text, rules text of the card anyhow. So, and more often than not, if something does come up where a player doesn't quite get what's going on, generally speaking, there'll be another person to explain. But I wanted to try to make this contained enough where I could give this to my dad and brothers, just give them the cube and have them draft it onto themselves and be able to navigate it.
No, that's really cool. I like that sense of making it accessible, not just so that you can guide somebody through it, but so that other people can walk through it themselves.
Mhm.
Leland, I do want to ask, did you did you ever consider the card An-Havva Inn for this project?
Well, we were just talking about aesthetic sensibilities. There is not an M15 frame on An-Havva Inn, so
No,
um,
I didn't think there's like a 1997 frame, right? This An-Havva Inn
no,
was
it's
Homelands.
strictly Homelands printing. And the reason why I chose the name An-Havva Inn is strictly the art, the Brian Snowdy art, where it's just an inn, a lively inn. You can look through the windows. There's a lot of people there. Again, this was back when it was determined bar cube design goals. So it's got the tavern vibe, but then also the background, you can tell it's night. There's like the moon
Mm.
looming over the backdrop, which I don't know, kind of gave this maybe spooky graveyard vibe potentially. And yeah, I love Homelands. I've got one of my EDH decks is Joven, all old border. I've got I
Excellent.
had Doug Schuler sign old Joven.
Oh man, that's sweet.
So yeah, it's one of my favorite deck. It's bracket one nonsense deck. And yeah, Homelands is like goofy in a very endearing way. So An-Havva Inn felt like the vibe for this cube.
And I know you just described like with the nighttime and the a little bit spooky in the background. The flavor text on the card is truly charming. A quote from Isan's Shade, which I believe a mono black creature says, "The inn was ever a steady source of good cheer and kindness. Greatly do I miss it now that I am gone." Positive vibes, even in the midst of being a little spooky.
Positive vibes. There's also, yeah, An-Havva being a village. There's Constable of An-Havva.
Oh yeah, yeah. The An-Havva Constable looks like
Yeah.
Sean Connery a little
Yeah.
bit from a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, sort of.
So I like to think that this gentleman, he's chilling at the inn.
That's really good.
They serve with passion, if not with grace. So we've got Yaskin. Yaskin and the other constables serve with passion, if not with grace.
May that be
Devon,
said of
fair
any
no.
of us.
Yeah. So he's overseeing everything that's going down in my cube.
That's really good. Well, something I wanted to make sure we covered, Leland. You talked about in the
Mhm.
process of exploring this cube, both in your overview and then some when we got to chat on Wild Dogs.
Yeah.
You talked about spending a lot of time kind of in the spreadsheets,
Mhm.
measuring out as fans and doing the numbers, kind of crunching down all these details in the back end, kind of trying to
Mhm.
do it right. Based on your experience here and kind of where you are presently with the project, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that balance of being spreadsheet accurate versus what you experience at the table.
Like you said, as we discussed over on Wild Dogs, subtle plug. Uh,
The very direct plug.
yeah, actually, go listen to that episode. But yeah, we did. I did mention as fans, and I think I brought up the example I gave was losing a night or two's sleep over the card Heritage Reclamation, which is it's just a disenchant that can also hit a card from a graveyard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was so fixated on if my cube that cares about delirium, if having enough disenchants, if that's good or bad in that type of environment. How good was the fact that Heritage Reclamation could also snipe your opponent's graveyard as an off-board instant speed effect, which this cube didn't have anyways. So it's like for a very simple card, I was so fixated on the many implications that had in this environment. And so yeah, it just in the end of crunching all the numbers and contemplating every single scenario, it's just in the cube now. Like at the end of the day, it's just there. Like
Just that
it was
binary switch, like, is it there? Is it
yeah,
not?
yeah. And I just made that decision and like, oh, I've spent probably a week just like in the maybe board, I guess you could call it. It was chilling in the maybe board. And after all that time spent obsessing and worrying, it's there now. So I think as fans and getting all the percentages right, when it comes to things like the amount of fixing or removal in your cube, it can be an extremely stressful process and is a huge hurdle that needs to be overcome when starting and continuing to curate an environment like this. But my point here ultimately is that, like, in order to get the most out of your environment, you need to focus on things like your overall mana curve, fixing gold card ratios, the amount of cards needed to support an archetype, these types of things. But the rubber really meets the road when you actually sit down and see the card being drafted. I think the feedback gained from actually running a draft with your Heritage Reclamation in the cube, seeing someone actually draft it, that's like miles more important than all the time I spent hyper fixating on the moment when it gets drafted. It's like, oh, just put it in there, test it. That's the point of like testing some of these things. But yeah, when you're first building a cube, you have to face as fans to some extent. You have to face all the number crunching, and I developed a spreadsheet of my own outside of Cube Cobras just to like sit myself down and like actually run all the numbers myself as like a, I don't know, some sort of I don't know. I just it is a super helpful thing to fully contextualize every little working piece as best as you can that's in your cube, but it isn't worth losing sleep over.
Do you think, Leland, that you would pursue a process like that again if you were starting this project or another one from scratch?
I mean, I think to some extent, yes. I think doing all the math myself helped contextualize a lot of things for me in a way that I will now use in future projects. It'll make those projects definitely go much more smoothly. But again, yeah, Cube Cobra, it's all integrated right in there. So come up with your list. You could take the approach of like coming up with your list, putting it all in there, and then comparing numbers to the top cubes on Cube Cobra. That's definitely an approach. But I think understanding the why of those percentages goes so much. There's so many articles that are devoted to like fixing lands. Like you can spend hours, days doing research on just your lands in your cube. So
You could spend whole podcasts on.
yeah, right. Um, Again, it's all about finding that balance of how useful is this information really for me versus its application when you actually sit down to draft the cube. And I think, long story short, yes, I would do I would do it again, but I don't know if I need to because I've already done it. And I think it was a worthwhile thing to sit down and calculate all the numbers yourself. It's a worthwhile endeavor, albeit a time consuming one.
No, that's great. I didn't want that to be a leading question either. I don't think there's a right answer there because each person's going
Right.
to say, well, which of the things that are
Mm.
worth my time, what's going to have diminishing returns, and what's like solid foundation that's going to help me.
Right.
Well, Leland, as you consider the An-Havva Inn and the joy, the kindness, the passion, if not grace. Just kidding. But as you consider the experience of working on this project,
Mm.
what advice would you want to make sure to pass on to other designers in their own step of the journey?
I've got two things, and they're somewhat antithetical to one another. The first one being let go of your ego. There's so much to be learned by poring over other cubes and talking cube with other like-minded cube nerds. Sometimes the cards that you try so hard to push into your format just don't work, and that's okay. Like, again, going back to my experiences with sitting down to actually draft the An-Havva Inn, I've learned so much about my cube just by like asking questions about how people's drafts went. So yeah, just like let some of your pretenses about how your cube should be go and just draft it and get that feedback. I think it's so valuable. However, on the other hand, you really should lean into your own preferences in terms of design. I think having again, me being firm with it being graveyard matters and it being bar cube, staying strict to that and being kind of true to myself and what I wanted to see within this environment has led me to continue wanting to design this cube. Like, yes, you absolutely should design a cube with your play group in mind, but you don't want to like fully, force that outside of your own personal preferences and design goals. So, yeah, and then I wrote, sometimes you do just need to throw in a Dermotaxi. That's one card that has been sitting like that's a card that I think is probably not great, but it's such like I just want there you can have pet cards is I guess the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and that's just I can't cut that one. I can't cut Dermataxi from this list. It's my ride or die. Literally, it's a vehicle. So
Thank you, Mark
yeah,
Zug, for this terrifying
it's
mammoth
so
car.
good. It's so good. But yeah, so I guess my advice would be let go of your ego for some things, receive feedback graciously and apply it, but then also stick to your guns about the dermotaxis in your life in your cube.
The dermotaxis in
Yeah.
your life. That's so good. Well, Leland, as we turn toward wrapping up here, I do get to ask one of my favorite questions, which is if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
So again, referencing back to our conversation on Wild Dogs, we talked at length about art, and we covered a lot of different from contemporary artists who we thought would be great additions to the magic artist sphere currently, to classic artists, baroque painters, to symbolism, to we covered a lot about art in that
It was,
conversation.
yeah, a lot of fun. That was a really fun
A very fun
exploration.
conversation about art, and it really got me thinking about this question, anticipating this question, and I settled on Unearth
Ah,
because
yes.
I love the original printing of Unearth. I'm not too keen on the more modern arts, I guess you could say. It's just a classic. It's so good. It's in this cube, so of course I had to pick a card that was in the An-Havva Inn, and I'd love to have it done by Winona Nelson. She
Yeah.
is an
Yeah.
incredible artist who's done a ton of my favorite Magic pieces, such as Favorable Winds, Azusa Lost But Seeking. You got Timna, and most importantly, Putrid Imp. For Pauper, I play Mogwarts, Goblin Combo. So I think that having potentially a Goblin themed Unearth done by the same artist as Putrid Imp, like I said, she's got some of my favorite art in Magic, period. So I think having an Unearth by Winona Nelson would be perfect for the An-Havva Inn. And then also I'd probably get a playset for my Pauper deck.
That's really good. I love that choice and the connection
Mhm.
there too.
So obviously, Putrid Goblin was the. I just love. It's just this goofy little guy in the bog, too stupid to survive, too dumb to die. Like Putrid Goblin's like it's such a good magic card. But then yeah, I think it's Migratory Route with the birds.
Yes. Because that piece is so cool too, because you have a different scene in the reflection than you have in the sky above.
Yes.
So you're seeing the route where they're traveling to, in addition to where they are presently. It's really cool.
Another one with reflection in it that she's done is Faded Infatuation. For 3 blue, an instant, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature you control. If it's your turn, scry 2. And I've got this in my. It's a mono blue commander deck. Elegeth and Siani. Elegeth is like, if you were to scry, draw instead. So this is like a 3 mana, create a token of a creature you control and draw 2 cards. Like it's just like a goofy, like I don't know where else you would play this, but yeah, the art on this is awesome because it's got all the fireflies and the pond with the reflection reaching out of the
I
water.
love it.
Yeah, anyways, this has been the Winona Nelson appreciation corner of the show.
I'm here for it. It's a great choice. Well, Leland, this has been a great opportunity just to get to sit down and chat, and I'm so glad that we got to share these moments to do so. Certainly want to encourage folks to go explore a little bit of Wild Dogs, to get to hear you and Luke kick around all sorts of things in a really fun way. But if folks want to connect with you or follow up on the An-Havva Inn or any of your other projects, where should we point them?
Yeah, real quick, thanks again, Cade, for having me on. This has been truly a pleasure to again connect with you about Cube and you have another wonderful conversation. It's always fun chatting with you about Magic. But yeah, if people want to connect with me or Luke via Wild Dogs, the show is currently on Spotify and YouTube and on social media, Instagram, X, and Discord. We're at Wild Dogs Pod. So yeah, definitely feel free to connect with us there.
Perfect. And I'll make sure things are linked in a way that folks can tag in from the show notes.
Awesome.
Well, Leland, truly thank you again for spending the time. I've enjoyed each chat we get to have, and I hope there are more in the future. But thank you so much for sharing the An-Havva Inn, and may the passion continue apace.
Yeah, likewise, Cade. Thank you so much for having me.